In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Amen. This video, I'm just going to give an opinion piece, I guess, on some of the words of Pope Francis concerning the bishops. And I don't really usually get into this kind of thing, but I was thinking about it, and I thought maybe I'd give my 2 cents. So I think, according to reports, Pope Francis had said something along the lines that homosexuality was not a crime, and that the bishops that agreed with laws that make it illegal need conversion or need to be converted. Okay? First of all is the word converted. I don't necessarily know that Pope Francis meant conversion as in reference to conversion to Christ. That wasn't specifically stated. It doesn't sound to me like he meant that. And then as far as the law goes, saying homosexuality is not a crime, I believe that Pope Francis was speaking of public law in the majority of the world. Now, I haven't done a lot of research and looked it up, but I do know that where it is a crime, or homosexuality or sodomy is a crime, namely in the Middle East, it's punishable by death. And they throw these people off of buildings. They murder them. They kill them. So the question is that I'm kind of faced with here is that there's been a lot of pushback against this, against what Pope Francis said. Now, I want to make myself clear. Do I believe that the acts of homosexuality, sodomy specifically, is a sin? Of course I do. It's a sin that is an abomination in the sight of God. With that being said, I don't know that Pope Francis, again, was speaking in those terms, because he did come back and kind of clarify, what he was stating. But if the thing, I guess the thing I'm trying to figure out with all the pushback that's going, the pushback and all the flack that's coming with this against what Pope Francis said, I'm having a hard time understanding the foundation of it. Because if he was speaking of public law, then I can really kind of understand where he's coming from. That homosexuality is not a crime. That's just a basic fact, I think, in the majority of free nations, if we want to call them free. So there's a couple of different aspects to this. Okay, we have church law, and then and God's law, the 10 Commandments, and then we have public law, right? So society at large, if society at large were completely converted to Christianity, you wouldn't need laws to outlaw, say, abortion. You wouldn't even need laws to outlaw murder, because everybody would be living in accordance with God's law, which is righteous. Okay? But we do have the separation of it. Okay, we have the society sector, if you will, the how do you say, the secular world, in which laws are put in place. The part that I'm having a hard time understanding is the foundation of those that are coming at Pope Francis for saying what he said about homosexuality not being a crime, and the bishops that agree with it need to be converted. Okay? Because they're coming at it from a religious aspect. Again, I don't know, and I don't think that Pope Francis meant converted in the sense of conversion to Christ. What I was thinking that he meant, or how I understood what he said, was that they need to really rethink their support of public law that makes sodomy illegal. Okay? And there's a reason for that, because all we have to do is stop for a minute and kind of think this through, if we just think it through, right? So let's say we make sodomy illegal in the United States. The first question we have to ask ourselves is that going to stop people from committing sodomy? The answer is obviously no. We have laws on the books that prevent murder, that make murder illegal, but people still commit murder. Okay, so when they break that law, when they commit murder, then they're punished and they go to prison. Sometimes for life, sometimes not for life, sometimes they get out on parole, sometimes they're put to death. So I would pose the question, if we're going to make sodomy illegal on the books in the United States, and that law is somehow broken, which it obviously will be, then we need to ask ourselves, what punishment do they deserve? Because in the Middle East, it's punishable by death. In places of the Middle East. In other places, I guess jail. I don't know. Like I say, maybe I'll do the research and kind of do a follow-up to this. But if you're going to come at it from a religious standpoint and want to support laws that make sodomy illegal, okay, because in the reason, there's a number of reasons, health reasons for one, right? It spreads sexually transmitted disease, in which case we would also have to make fornication illegal. But again, if you're going to come at it from a religious standpoint, saying that sodomy is an abomination in the sight of God and it should be public law that it is illegal, then you have to be consistent and follow through with that. My point is, if sodomy is an abomination in the sight of God and is damnable, a damnable sin, so is lying, so is murder, so is adultery, so is fornication. If you go into the Catechism of the Catholic Church, so is gossip. That's a damnable sin. So is slander or bearing false witness. I guess my question is where do you stop? Where does it stop? Okay? And I think the approach that Pope Francis is taking, or what he's trying to say, is that if you make sodomy illegal in public law, and then you enforce that law by punishment or by fines, then you would have to, that in no way is going to bring about the conversion of someone who is committing sodomy. What these people need is healing. Okay? And again, if we're going to stay consistent, then the love of money should be made illegal. I wonder if the bishops would support that. I wonder if the bishops would support a law that says you do 6 months in jail if you look at a woman in lust. And again, so the point I'm trying to make here is that you're not going to bring about conversion by punishing sin from the public sector with laws that are passed. It'll cause a greater rift. And these people that would be punished for it are not going to see a church that is merciful, or a church that wants to heal, or the church that understands, or the church that wants to bring about healing. What they will see is a church that is tyrannical. That's the way that would be interpreted. And so I guess I would just pose the question, if we're going to make sodomy illegal from a public law standpoint, to where if sodomy is committed and found out and then punished for no other reason than we know it's an abomination in the sight of God, then we need to stay consistent, and we need to make all the other sins that I just named illegal too. And so I don't think there's a person out there that's hearing my voice that hasn't one time or another told a little white lie, or looked at another person in lust, or slandered someone, or gossiped, or had an occasion of greed or gluttony, or has ever been in a position to where they hated someone. Jesus actually said that was murder. And he said, if you look at a woman in lust, or anyone else for that matter, you basically committed adultery with them in your heart. And we can say as Catholics, well, I've gone to confession and I'm sorry for what I did, and I've been forgiven, but we still haven't done the time. We still haven't paid the price for the crime. So if a guy were to go into a confessional and confess to a priest that he murdered someone, is he forgiven? If he's sincere in his confession, yes. But he still hasn't done the time for murdering that person. And so the point I'm trying to make here is I don't understand the foundation of the argument of what is being pushed, and all the fingers being pointed at Pope Francis for saying that homosexuality is not a crime. Now, I think some people just take his words out of context on purpose and try to use it against him. But again, there's a number of different ways you can read that. He never said it wasn't a crime in the eyes of God. All he said is it's not a crime. To have homosexual tendencies or to struggle with homosexuality is not even a sin. It's when you fall into the actions that go along with that it can become sin. But it works the same way in lust. Let's say a man like me, okay? I have absolutely no homosexual tendencies whatsoever. I don't understand it. I can't even wrap my mind around it, okay? But let's say that I find a woman attractive, and I begin to look at her, and I begin to toy with these thoughts in my mind, and I put myself in a position to where I fall into fornication. How is that any different in the eyes of God than someone who struggles with homosexuality and falls? It's the nature of the sin, I think, that people don't, in general, don't understand, that we look at that sin somehow differently than, say, fornication. Or if you want to take it to the extreme as Jesus did, just looking at a woman in lust, you've committed adultery. So the question is, if you're going to punish one sin, let me back up. Let me how do I say, expand on this a little bit, okay? Now, there's a number of different reasons why people fall into things they do, okay? Especially when they're really, really bad sins, like sodomy or, constant fornication, drugs and alcohol, whatever it is. 9 times out of 10, you can go back to the childhood and it was caused by a trauma, or it was caused by a broken family, or it was caused by a molestation. And, sometimes it's a psychological issue. And these psychological issues sometimes are passed on through a generation that suffers from generational psychological issues, okay? And that's really where it needs to be addressed, I think. Putting laws on the book that make sodomy or any other sin, for that matter, illegal is not going to bring about the conversion of anyone. That's what purgatory is. Purgatory is a process of cleansing. It's a process of purification. It's a process, if you will, of healing, of ridding our souls of all these things that we've held on to so that we can enter into the beatific vision of God. But a public law that would punish someone for a sin, I don't think should be supported. Unless, of course, it's like murder. But a sexual sin, somebody that struggles with this, and there are different levels of it. You can deal with someone who just struggles with homosexuality. You can deal with someone who struggles with homosexuality and occasionally falls into sodomy. And then you can take it even a step further, where someone who struggles with homosexuality falls into sodomy and then, molests little boys or little girls if it's on the other end of the spectrum. Okay, so there's differing levels, but we already have on the books that if a child molestation is illegal and it's wrong. But to outlaw homosexuality, I don't even know how you would do that. I don't. That's what I mean. I don't understand the foundation of it. Homosexuality is not a crime, and the bishops that support it need to be converted. So if you're going to outlaw homosexuality, which is not the act of acting out on those passions or those desires, it's just what you struggle with, then those bishops also need to support laws that would make it illegal for a man to look at a woman in lust, or masturbation needs to be put on the books and made illegal. Even if you don't do it, even if you don't fall into it, just the desire, okay, should be illegal. Now, with that being said, do I think gay marriage should be legal? No, I don't. I don't think, because it's not a marriage. Marriage is between a man and a woman. And this is where the lines begin to become skewed, okay? If you're on the far, far right, and this is where most of the agitation is with what Pope Francis said, okay, then you're going to have to stay consistent and make every sin that every single person struggles with that is a mortal sin illegal. If you're on the far, 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 far left, then you're going to have to say, well, the church is so welcoming that no matter what we do or what we fall into, we're welcome into the church. So on one end, you're making Christ's law tyrannical. And on the other end of the spectrum, it's anything goes. I can enter Christ's church on my own conditions and not on Christ's conditions. Okay? But the fact of the matter is, as Catholics, every time we sin mortally, every time we commit a mortal sin, we separate ourselves from the Church of Christ because we thought we could do what we wanted to do, meaning that we thought we could be Catholic, or we fell into something that is not in line with the teaching of the church, which is in the teaching of Christ, which is not the conditions of discipleship for Jesus. And so this is where the lines get blurred. Is again, you have on one hand, you want to outlaw homosexuality, which is not a crime. Pope Francis is right. It is not a crime to struggle with homosexuality. Every single one of us have a predominant fault. Whether or not we fall into that fault, okay, or fall into that sin, greatly depends on our prayer life, our sacramental life, how often are we going to confession, receiving the Eucharist, praying the Rosary, okay? But to struggle with a predominant fault is not a sin. And this is what I believe that Pope Francis meant when he said that it's not a crime, and that bishops that agree with making homosexuality, okay, just that great big broad spectrum that covers, that one word, a crime, I think he's totally right. Because even if you take it, like I said, a step further and you want to let's break it down to the act of sodomy illegal, well, then what's to stop the church or the Pope from wanting to make fornication illegal? Looking at a woman in lust going the love of money illegal, which Jesus said is the root of all evil. And if we're gonna go there, why not just follow through the whole catechism of the Catholic Church and make every single mortal sin that is listed in that catechism illegal and punishable by jail time, a fine, community service? I'd be willing to bet that the majority of people listening to my voice, including myself, and I'm hoping what this will lead to is a self-examination of conscience. Okay? Which one of us has not committed a mortal sin? Have we gone to confession and been forgiven? Yes, but have we done the time for the crime? Which one of us can stand before Jesus Christ and perfectly innocent? And so, again, I think his words were taken out of context and used to attack him. And I would agree that the bishops, and I wouldn't use the word converted, I would have used the words maybe need to rethink their position. Because if you follow the line of thought to its conclusion, it's not a good place. You would have the church in bed with the state making laws that make sin, mortal sin, illegal. And so what we're doing is we're actually making the state enforce God's justice. That's what we would be doing. And there isn't a person I know. There isn't a person I'd be willing to bet 99.9% of the people on the face of the planet would end up in jail. And so this is what I think Pope Francis meant, is that struggling with homosexuality is not a crime. No differently than my predominant fault is not a crime, or anyone else out there listening to my voice is not. It's not a crime. It's not against the law. If it were against the law on the highest level, and there weren't opportunity to receive grace and mercy through confession, through the sacraments, through the church, we would all go to hell. So Jesus is a just judge. God's laws are just. There is no way around that. But there is not one person on the face of the earth besides the Blessed Virgin Mary that didn't break one. Not one. And so, again, I'm looking at the foundation. I'm having a hard time understanding the foundation of those that are attacking Pope Francis for what he said. He never said it wasn't a sin. To act out on those desires is sinful. But to struggle with homosexuality is not a sin, nor is it a crime. Now, again, if we fall into the desire of looking at a woman or another man or whatever it is in lust, that can lead to sin. But if we're going to make homosexuality a crime, then we need to make all the other mortal sins crimes too. And so, again, it's just a matter of thinking about this to its end conclusion and where it leads to. It doesn't lead to a good place. Okay? And there may be an argument with abortion, but the fact of the matter is abortion is murder. Now, whether or not certain people understand that, or the state understands that, which I think many of them do, it's really there just to make money. The laws are already on the book that you shall not commit murder. So let me ask you this. I think as most Catholics, right, we would love to see a law in this country that banned abortion and made it illegal. Okay? But what do we do with the women that have already had abortions? What do we do with the women that are confused and don't know what to do, or were raped or were used, and they do the procedure themselves? Do we then send them to prison? Or do we approach them in love and understanding? It's one thing to ban something. It's a completely different thing to punish someone for it. So if you're going to make sodomy illegal, then there has to be a corresponding punishment for those who commit it. I don't see any way around this. The way, I mean, any other conclusion. I can't come to another conclusion other than this. If you're going to make sodomy illegal because it's an abomination in the sight of God, then you have to follow through and make the other sins that are abomination in the sight of God illegal as well. And if you make them illegal and it's punishable by jail time or a fine or prison, those people that fall into that weakness will never, ever, ever view the church as a place of healing, a place of mercy, and a place of salvation. And the end result of that is, over a period of time, is the whole thing flips. And the very people that would be punished for committing a sin in this way end up in power and then turn the whole thing around and against the church, and eventually would make Christianity illegal. All you have to do is think it through to the end conclusion. It's only a matter of time before people like this would get in power. Some of them already are. But that's what they would do. They would make Christianity illegal because it's tyrannical, it's intolerant, it doesn't show mercy, it has no understanding. And so we need to be very, very careful when we think about these things, or when we spout these things off. Now, Pope Francis corrected himself from what I understand. And he's had to do that a number of times. I think he just speaks off the cuff. I really do. But some of the things that he says are taken out of context and then portrayed in a way that he never meant it. Again, he never said that homosexuality or acting on those desires was not a sin. That's not what he said. What he said was, it's not a crime. And even with that being said, he didn't say that it's not a crime in the eyes of God. You see? So the attacks that go with him or go at him seem to want to add in those words without adding in those words. And so things can be taken out of context. And then a lot of things can be taken out of context and twisted and turned to use to push an agenda. Okay? And so it's like I said, if you go too far to the right, and this is the only way it's going to be, and the church has gone wrong, and the church has gone bad, and they're making all these mistakes, it's only a matter of time before you nail your rules and your laws on the door of the church no differently than Martin Luther. Because of a number of bad priests or homosexual bishops or whatever it is in the church that are committing sacrilege and other crimes and this, that, and the other, that's what's going to end up happening. That's where you will end up. You will end up doing the exact same thing Martin Luther did, and you will break away from the church. If you're on the far left, the danger is that you push an agenda that is on your conditions. You push an agenda of Christianity that is on your conditions rather than on the conditions of Christ. They have to be grounded and founded on the conditions of Jesus. And this is why it's so important, I believe, to stay in the middle of the boat. You have to stay in the middle of the boat. There's a balance. There is a very fragile balance that has to be there, especially in the age that we're living in. You know, in the early church, confessions were done out in the open in front of the congregation. And if someone who came in to the church was baptized, confirmed, and then fell into a mortal sin, they couldn't receive the Eucharist for up to 5 years. Do these far-right traditionalists want to go back to that? Because I'd be willing to bet 90% of them go to confession every week and at least once a month, if not once a year, confess a mortal sin. So should they not be able to receive the Eucharist for 5 years? Again, this is the way things need to be thought out. In a way that is that understands both, or tries to understand both sides, and somewhere comes to a conclusion in the middle. Now, I think I would never put someone on the far right, okay, in a position of power. In the same way, I would not put someone who's far left in a position of power or leadership within the church. Now, we can say Pope Francis is liberal. He's probably one of the most liberal popes we've had. But he's not so far right that, or left, I mean, that he's just whatever you want to do, you do. Yes, he's very liberal. But on the other side, again, if you had someone that was far right, they may say completely do away with the new Mass. And so I would ask those on the far right that are out there, kind of promoting this stuff, how would you feel about that in reference to those people who love going to the new Mass, who love the new Mass? Would you stand up for them? From what I've seen, it doesn't sound like it. It doesn't sound to me as though they would stand up for people that love the new Mass, that have only ever attended the new Mass. It's the only Mass they know. And so, again, this is the reason it's so important to stay in the middle of the boat. We have to stay in the middle of the boat. It is justice combined with incomprehensible eternal love and mercy. And that's what needs to happen. There's a lot of problems in the church. There's a lot of things that need to be cleaned up. But if we go too far to the right or too far off to the left, I'm telling you right now, you're going to fall off the boat. If those on the far right, on the far right, okay, keep going the way they're going, they're going to end up just like Martin Luther, and they're going to nail their rules to the door of the church. And those on the far left, if they succeed at pushing the agenda that they want to push, they're going to turn the church into a circus where anything goes. And again, so there needs to be a balance. There needs to be justice in line with the conditions that Jesus said, combined with the exact same love, mercy, and understanding that all of us have been shown by God. That's where we need to meet. That's where it needs to come together. That's wisdom. Not forcing laws on someone and punishing them for falling into a weakness because you believe it's an abomination in the sight of God, or that the church teaches that it's an abomination in the sight of God. If that were the case, then every single one of us would end up in jail. May God bless you. May he keep you. May he cause his face to shine upon you. And may he grant you his peace. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.